Welcome everyone to another episode to the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Today with your host Bernhard Guenther, and my very special guest today is Matthew Stephen, communicating directly from Melbourne, Australia, or a little bit outside Melbourne, from another belly of the beast in this day and age. And Matthew has been on the journey for quite a few years as well. He's a fellow spiritual warrior and truth seeker, and has gone through his own tribulations and struggling. And he actually released a book earlier this year. He published a book just in the right timing in March. It's called Free Range Humans, Exposing the Matrix Control System and Awakening the True Self, a man of my liking. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Thanks for having me, Bernard. I've been listening to pretty much every show since your first episode and have absolutely loved the content you and Laura have put out, and you've had the quality of guests has been incredible. So it's a real honor to be on.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew. And also, we just to let the audience know, we've known each other for quite some years. You were actually also part of the Time of Transition retreat 4 years ago. The second one I hosted with my brother Fred down in Peru in the high jungle. And back then, you were going through your own process. You were there with your girlfriend back then, now wife, and you started already that writing process of that book back then, and in conjunction with your own process. So we can get deep into that book in a bit as well. But just for the listeners, tell us a little bit about your journey, because it's always interesting how you came about to the work you're doing now and your journey of the past few years.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was born and raised in Melbourne. I grew up in an area called the Yarra Valley, which is a beautiful area of Melbourne. It's about 50 minutes away from the city, and I'm back living there now. So throughout my late teens and 20s, I played professional sport here in Melbourne, in a sport known as the Australian Football League. Australians will be very familiar with it, but it's a very little known sport outside of Australia. And that was an incredible journey for me. I learned so many lessons from that. It was a childhood dream to play that, and I sort of thought all my desires and dreams and everything I wanted would come true if I made it. And I did end up sort of achieving a reasonable amount of success in that. But the side effect of that was I really didn't have the tools to cope with the stress that came along with such an intense pressure cooker environment. The media scrutiny that came with that, just pushing your mind, pushing your mind and body for so hard. And I really didn't have that balance, as well as sort of being in a very sort of overly masculine environment. And so the side effect with that was that to sort of cope, I started to become reliant on sleeping pills, in particular Ambien, and that led into basically a 10-year addiction. It took me a long time to beat that. And the other side effects were sort of, just partying, binge drinking, recreational drugs and things like that, just to sort of cope with the stress of it all. And it got to the point where after a pretty sort of messy breakup with an ex-girlfriend in 2011, I sort of hit rock bottom, and that's when I started really questioning about the way I was going about my life, because here I'd achieved so many things that I desired, yet I was unhappy. I was in a broken relationship. I had these addictions. I was seeking these quick fixes to sort of fulfill myself. And, I'd always been more of a spiritually minded person. I'd always sort of thought differently than people around me growing up, and asked deeper questions and just looked at the world a bit differently. But I'd really suppressed that for a long time to sort of fit in with this environment around me. And it was about that point around 2011 where I started to really just question the way I was going about things. It was the pain I was going through was enough to sort of shock me a little bit, shock me awake, and just sort of reflect back on how I was sort of approaching my life, and also just start asking deeper questions about the world I was in. Like, why am I feeling this way? Why is there so much suffering around me? Those sort of things. And, it was about that point, it's always sort of the way those synchronicities work, where a David Icke book fell into my lap. And And I know Ike is a polarizing figure, and I've even got some issues with his work myself. But that book couldn't have come at a more perfect timing. It's just exactly what I needed to read at that point of time. It was called "Remember Who You Are," and it was just like a splash of cold water on my face. Like, it just really hit me so hard. It was the perfect timing. And that really started my journey of awakening. And it was from that point around late 2011, 2012, a sort of point, as you know, where a lot of people started waking up, where I just, really started to make a decision just to really explore those deeper sides of myself, really try and transform myself and live my life based on higher morals and sort of with a deeper meaning. And it took the sleeping pill addiction, however, kept lingering. I found that really, really hard to break. And that was one of the things that spurred me on to your retreat, because I met my wife, Steph, who coincidentally at the time had the exact same addiction. And she'd battled with an eating disorder in the past as well. And so we both thought, all right, when I came across your retreat, I saw it pop. A friend sort of tagged me in a post on Facebook, and just everything about it just was what was exactly what I was craving at that point. So we bit the bullet, booked flights. I booked flights over to Peru without even telling her. It was that was an incredible. Your retreat in particular was what sort of sent me from that exploring my spiritual side, personal development, to sort of going more on the esoteric path. And we can probably talk a little bit about, that sort of what the esoteric path is. And that sort of really helped deepen my journey. It's been an incredible journey ever since.
Yeah, beautiful. And also congratulations, you just became a father. Right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So
I had a little boy arrive in our lives 3 months ago. So, absolutely incredible feeling.
Awesome. So, I think before we dive deeper into more the esoteric fringe and occult and all of that, and, because it's, as we know, reality is multi-leveled, and it's always like, I'm sure you know, and you applied in yourself, the work is holistic. We need to approach it from an integral perspective on all levels. We are multidimensional beings, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and that's how we need to view the world as well, different aspects of reality. We cannot exclude something. We cannot, probably all maybe took the New Age pill at some point or tried to spiritual bypass our processes, but it always comes back around, right? So let's just look right now, because that's the times we're in right now, what's going down in Melbourne, Victoria, because I have to share something. I was actually... before the first retreat in 2016, I was invited to go to Australia to speak at this festival. I think you wanted to go there, right? Maitreya Festival?
Yeah, that's correct. That was the first time I came across your work, and my wife and I had both booked tickets to that festival specifically to come see your talk, actually.
Yeah. There was this festival, and Max Egan was booked there as well. And, they paid me the flight, everything to speak there, and I flew there, and then all of a sudden it got shut down right there. I mean, I don't know if the laws, they didn't have no permit. The police came with helicopters. It completely got shut down. And it was a mess, basically. I still gave a talk, like a rogue talk to like people who stayed there, to 30 or 40 people just on the camping ground. But, I love the Australians. I made great friends there. I hung out, with friends in Sydney. I visited Max Egan and down in Gold Coast, and it was beautiful. I found the Australians very grounded, very real. Like you guys are where you're at in that sense. It can be different to Americans sometimes, but I loved it also, the climate and everything. So I always thought, fuck, when shit goes down, I'm just gonna move to Australia or even New Zealand. And now it's like, what the fuck? It's topsy-turvy. I mean, the shit's going down in here as well. And I mean, I left California a while already. But it's even more severe now in Melbourne, the draconian Orwellian laws and all of that, and especially in Victoria regarding the lockdown, regarding this COVID. And who is the dictator in charge right now? What's his name again? Dan Andrews?
Dan Andrews, yeah.
Dan Andrews, the guy. So give me your insight, like what's been happening over the past few months in Melbourne, Victoria, regarding the lockdown?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been interesting watching people's reactions around the world to this situation we're in, because the numbers really don't justify it. Like, we've had, funnily enough, he came out yesterday and announced that we've had 666 deaths all up in Victoria since the
666.
Yeah, so he came out with the devil's number. I thought that was very, very interesting. And a lot of, there's, like in many places, there's a lot of controversy around those deaths, issues around nursing homes, people being listed as COVID deaths when they've most likely died of, another comorbidity and things like that. Yet we've got one of the most severe lockdowns in the world. And he came out yesterday and basically has said that the only way we're going to come out of these lockdowns if cases are below 5 new cases a day, not deaths, but new cases.
Wow.
And that has to be for 14 days straight. So pretty much based on how things have been going.
Dealing with interference once again.
He's the only one who has been using these Chinese testing kits. So the rest of Australia has been using these homemade testing kits. And Dan Andrews has been using these ones made in Beijing. And a lot of researchers are revealing that these Beijing testing kits have a much, much higher level of false positives. So basically all people need to do is go out and get tested, and we're going to be staying above those 5 new cases. Wow. So it's a really crazy situation we're in. And I would say the best way to describe the general public is a state of shock, because here in Australia, we really haven't had any experience like this before. As you said, the Australian culture, it's a really beautiful culture. People are very laid back. People are very friendly. But we're not very politically minded. Like, politics is not discussed here. People don't get involved. It's not passionate. The presidential, they're not called presidential races here, but it is so different to America. It's like we're in another world. There's no campaigning. There's no tours. There's no debates. There's no people getting involved. There's no flags. There's no banners. It's just like, yeah, who are you going to vote for, mate? That's it. Like, round a barbecue. Who do you reckon you vote for? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a big show here as well for the most part. It's the other extreme. It's like all like appearances,
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Like, let's talk about that in general, because I was really surprised, even on Facebook, Melbourne, get the, speak up, what the hell is going on? Especially so I seen the protest, what happened recently in Berlin a couple of times, literally millions of people. Of course, the Mockingbird mainstream media, denounces that just right-wing Nazi anti-vaxxers or whatever, but there's genuinely concerned citizens speaking up and like seeing through the lies. Right. We also saw even in the US, the CDC came out with the 6% number, that 6% of the cases were actually not COVID related. Right. So it's a difference between dying from COVID or with COVID. Right. So that's the huge difference. And, the tests are useless in themselves because they cannot isolate the virus. We have, there's a lot of research around that as well. So it's so easily to manipulate the number for their agenda, even with what he said, the 5 deaths, or 5 cases in 14 days. This can be easily manipulated in his regard. But, talking about what's up with, you mentioned the Australians in their political history, or also what I heard, what they call the nanny state. What is the nanny state in Australia? What does it even mean?
Yeah, well, the nanny state is just referring to how much control and authority the state has in our lives. And people here are generally very accustomed to it, where the state, the amount of rules and regulations and permits you need just to do anything here is pretty crazy. And often when an Australian travels over to Europe and experiences a sort of a bit more of a relaxed state and people having more autonomy and more freedom, we sort of can reflect back on how it is here and be like, whoa, this is actually crazy. And I think it's because we were speaking about it before the show. Australia was sort of we haven't really had that kind of like revolution in our history that, for example, you guys had over in America, or like the Declaration of Independence and that patriotic spirit that is sort of taught to people when they're grown up. I know it's probably with the Marxist infiltration of America, they're trying to wean that history out. But it's still, I think it's still there in people's hearts. And whereas we really haven't had anything like that here in Australia. We sort of haven't. So I think with the state having so much control, it's very normalized here. Probably the one sort of thing close to a revolution we had here, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Bushranger Ned Kelly. He's sort of an iconic Australian figure who in the late 1800s sort of rebelled against the state and rebelled against the police and stuff like that, but he lost. So he's depicted in our history books as being kind of like the villain, and he ended up getting hanged. So we're raised thinking that as children, we're pummeled with our minds thinking if you rebel, this is what happens to you. It doesn't work out very well. And so what it's allowed to happen is that when we're colonized here, there was no revolution, there was no breakaway from the British Crown. And so they've really been able to engineer an environment here from the very beginning exactly how they want it. And with very little resistance, and we were disarmed back in 1996. So we don't have that right to bear arms, or you can get a rifle, but it can only be for hunting, and it's very, very difficult to get one. And so right now, as I was saying before, despite all this, we have had, despite the nanny state, we have had a very peaceful country, and things have, in general, we've had a good economy, and things have been good for people. And that's why right now, I would say the general state of Victoria, the best way to describe it would be a state of shock, because most people who aren't awake didn't see this coming. Communism is something that happens in a faraway land. It never happens here in Australia. And so most believe what's going on here is generally about our health. And so it was very, very beginning. I've been quite outspoken from, similar to yourself, like when you've been researching how this global cabal, global cult works, and how they work through engineering societies, through false flags and all these things. And they've attempted pandemics in the past. So people who have been researching this could see from the very beginning, this is another part of the agenda. This is another way for them to justify transforming society. But so I've been very outspoken about this from the beginning, and it's very, very difficult. It's been very difficult to sort of get people to see that, because the fear and terror job here, like it has been around the world, they've done a very good job of it. They got people, they've absolutely terrorized people through the media, through the stories, through every method possible. And so I would say the whole last 6 months, or since this began, people here have been in a state of shock. And as you know, when we're in shock, when we're in fear, it activates that reptilian brain. It shuts down people's ability to think critically and actually see what's going on. And when they're in that fear, they kind of like, they nearly like it that someone's imposing these draconian measures, because they think it's keeping them safe. But what I truly believe now is that I think the shock is starting to wear off. And I think more and more people are starting to come back to a sense of lucidity, particularly because the COVID narrative, more and more around the world, including here, is breaking down. People are seeing that the death rate isn't high, that the number, especially the numbers here, like they projected tens of thousands of deaths at the beginning, and we've had 650 in Victoria alone.
If that number is correct to begin with, right?
What was that? Sorry.
If that number 650 is real to begin with, right?
Exactly. That's with their fudge statistics, 100%. Yeah. So more and more people, and that's been the beauty of social media, where people starting to speak out, and more actual legitimate evidence and truth is starting to filter its way up through all the propaganda. And it takes time, and people need to be ready for it. They need to get themselves out of that state of shock first. And I do think that's what's happening here more and more. I'm seeing more and more people speaking out about it. More and more of the silent majority around me who really don't normally talk about politics, don't normally get involved in these things, are starting to go, wait, this is serious. Like, because the reality of the situation is hitting people in that, everyone's starting to know someone whose business was destroyed, who has a relative who's got depression or extreme anxiety or loneliness, or my sister has a friend whose grandmother committed suicide the other day, and they believe it was from loneliness in the lockdown, because the elderly, the fear and terror job on the elderly has been extreme. So most of them have been so isolated because no one wants to go near them and make them sick. And if you're an elderly person on your own, and what keeps you going is your family and friends and your social life and things like that, and you've had none of that all year, it's going to be extremely hard. And so that reality is starting to hit people more and more. People are starting to realize that if it keeps going this way, the economy is not going to recover. Things will never be the same here. People aren't going to want to invest in Melbourne, which has been widely known as one of the most beautiful and livable cities in the world. And so I'm seeing a lot of shifts in the last, probably the last week or two. And then Dictator Dan, as we call him, came out and announced yesterday, as I said, that basically the lockdowns are going to continue unless the cases fall below a super unachievable number, particularly with the false positives. And so more and more people here are coming out of that shock, coming into lucidity. And it's actually, as a result, triggering, I believe, a bit of a wide-scale awakening. People are becoming more aware of topics and more interested in topics that they never were interested in before. And I can sort of monitor this because I'm very involved in that world. I've been talking about these things for years, connecting with people for years, trying to get my family and friends and the people around me aware of these things. And all of a sudden, everyone's talking about it. And so I'm like, oh, okay, that's one positive coming out of this.
Exactly. So that's some good. So that's, again, we can talk about this later when we go a bit deeper, esoterically speaking, but it's almost a paradox, right? Right, this comfort is the murder of the soul, as Khalil Gibran said, and it sounds like Australians have been lived a comfortable life all these years. They're on their own continent, island, no wars really at all, no upheaval, no nothing. Get used to the comfort, but then you also just blindly trust government. You don't get involved. You just whatever, right? And then you don't stand up because you don't want to get out of your comfort zone, and then it's easier. Then they give you these draconian laws like, hey, if you guys want to stay safe, then you need to listen and stand in line, basically, or stay in line, basically. But if there's more pressure put on, then there's a shock. The trauma response says it's normal, like the disassociation. Like there's a global matrix installment program really infused in us. But there's a point when it's like, you break through and it comes to the point of like, what the fuck, this is just not ain't right. And you mentioned as well, thankfully, social media, we have ways to share information. And I want to ask you about this because it was very disturbing. There were some videos by this pregnant woman, for example, that got arrested in her home because she made certain Facebook posts, and there were other videos as well. And some people say these were fake, but it seems to be that they, especially with that woman that was real, she literally got arrested. And that's scary, man. That's like out of a, like a Black Mirror movie. The cops come, by because of your bad social credit, because you talked shit about something on social media. So can you share about those cases a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. Those instances really another thing that sent a shock throughout the community, because in general here, like the police, in general, the public have respect for the police here. And obviously you've got sort of rogue examples here and there where, sort of like the exceptions, but in general, there's not any tension between the police and the public. There's a general level of respect. So for people to sort of see this absolute draconian kind of like approach to enforcing the laws, it's been incredible. And it's also been very different here in Victoria, the approach of the police compared to around Australia. So for example, on the weekend, there were these Freedom Day protests, and they knew that these were very publicly broadcast that these were going to happen around the world, around Australia. And so the Victorian police launched about a 3-week campaign to basically put fear and terror in people's minds about going going to this protest. The Premier came out, threatened that they could impose up to $20,000 fines. They've been arresting people, as you said, based on Facebook posts, which is so Orwellian. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I want to stop. Just want to, on that note, real quick, before you continue, sorry to interrupt, but I want the audience, the listeners, viewers to imagine that, really, the insanity. Like you post something on Facebook, like da-da-da-da-da, and next thing you know, the cops show up. Hey, you posted on Facebook, this is against the law. We're going to take you to the police station. I mean, this is just insanity, right?
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I think that's why some people thought it was faked, because they just can't believe this would be happening. And that pregnant woman, for those who haven't seen the video, I mean, it went super viral, but she did a post, and it was a post just saying, hey, everyone, meet here on the weekend. Make sure to bring your mask. Let's practice social distancing. Let's keep this really peaceful and respectful. So she's not inciting violence. She's not inciting anything bad, but it was just obviously in these emergency, they've announced a state of emergency here. Actually, they've announced we're officially declared a state of disaster here. So let that sink. I'm not joking. Wow. He's declared us a state of disaster, and we're going to be officially declared a state of emergency until next March. So a state of disaster, that's normally the extreme of the extreme. That's normally if like a hurricane comes and takes out a city, or if maybe the bushfires we had earlier in the years, like something that is a legitimate disaster. But right now we're apparently in a state of disaster. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. And so what these emergency or disaster powers give the government is the power to impose these extreme laws. And so technically by the law, if we go out and protest right now, it's illegal. We can be arrested. And so what we saw on the weekend is around Australia, people go out and from all the reports I heard, the police were really respectful. They actually just monitored things. They just made sure things were peaceful. Here in Victoria, they sent out riot squads. They threatened having the army. The riot squads went out and targeted people. They ambushed protesters. They were very aggressive. They were arresting old people. And obviously this is on top of arresting people from their Facebook posts alone. Organizers were arrested. Another on top of the pregnant woman, about a week ago, a 76-year-old man who was trying to organize a protest was his home was raided. They confiscate all the technology, all the phones, everything in the house. The guy had to, with the pregnant woman, the guy had to stop recording because he had to hand his phone over to the police. And so what we're seeing here is just it's like something off a dystopian movie. I'm not sure if you've seen that movie Equilibrium with Christian Bale. It sort of came around the time of The Matrix. It wasn't as popular as The Matrix, but came around that time. I really recommend people seeing that because it's exactly where the world's heading. And right now, Melbourne is sort of being used as a blueprint to test that out, I believe. And we're seeing sort of like we're seeing the early stages of it right now. And so the more this is happening, though, the tighter they squeeze on us, the more it's sinking into people that this is not about their health. Clearly, this is not about their health. And so that's, as I said before, that's the one sort of like silver lining to this, is that in terms of an awakening process, it is helping to catalyze an awakening because, and I don't really see how we can get maybe deeper into this in another little bit, but people were so asleep here, so in their comfort zone, so in their routine. We nearly needed like something like this to actually snap people out of the spell they are in.
Yeah,
exactly. Sorry.
As I was saying, like even like Gurdjieff talked about. I know you're familiar with his work. Shocks are necessary sometimes.
Yes,
to snap you out of awakening. And it can, a shock can also create dissociation, trauma, but sometimes shock is like, fuck, you wake up, a slap in the face. You cannot just always, hey, check this out. It's, you need to speak out, but sometimes, you need to like realize, as Gurdjieff said, the horror of the situation, like, fuck, we need to do something, right? So speaking about it, like before we go deeper, I'm very interested because it seems to be centralized around, or especially affecting Victoria, Melbourne. So Victoria, For people who are not familiar, it's like a state, right? Like California, Arizona.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Right. But because I've talked to
correct.
other people, other friends around Australia from all other places, and they're not as much affected at all. So what is it about Victoria and Melbourne and Dan Andrews? So what is behind the scenes, do you think, why Victoria is targeted like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why, but I obviously have some theories around it. Dan Andrews, our premier dictator, Dan, he seems to be particularly in bed with the Chinese Communist Party. He seems to definitely be either blackmailed or willingly going along with the deep state, and just he's a puppet who's just playing his role really well. And so I'm not sure if Melbourne was chosen to test out this extremely draconian response to this fake pandemic because he was just the most willing puppet, or whether there were other reasons as well. I definitely think he is the most willing puppet, but I also think possibly Melbourne was the easier place to try this out because we're the coldest city in the winter. So I think that it's easier to sort of engineer the numbers and fake the numbers, because our flu season is generally worse than all the other cities anyway. And so I believe that what they've been doing is just basically turning flu into COVID. And and also Melbourne in general is a bit of a trendsetter for Australia. So I think sort of what they're doing is just setting the blueprint here that they want to then implement in stages all around Australia and obviously the world if they get their way. So it's sort of like how they want this technocratic communist control system all around the world, this global cult or cabal, whatever you want to call them. And, their testing ground for a number of decades has been China. They've basically perfected it in China, where they've implemented this technocratic communist system. They've implemented the social credit system, and it's been the perfect sort of testing ground for them. And now they're trying to tiptoe it around the rest of the world. And I think that's what they're doing here in Australia. They're doing compartmentalizing it here in Victoria, possibly for those reasons I just mentioned. Dan Andrews being the most willing puppet, Melbourne being a trend center, being the coldest winter here. But I think what they're doing here is the blueprint for what they want everywhere else. Yeah. I think if they tried it everywhere at once, I think it would be much harder for them to control the uprising. If you can imagine they did this exact same thing to all the 25 million people at once in Australia, I think that it would be much harder for them to sort of put their foot on the uprising that would no doubt result. Whereas if they do it in one state, they can sort of allow that to sort of become what they're doing to become normalized for the rest of the country, so that when they start doing it everywhere else, it's like doesn't shock people as much, because as they know that shocks wake people up as well. And so I'm pretty confident that they want to do this in a way that minimizes the resistance as much as possible. But I also think that they're overreaching themselves even regardless, because I think we can talk about this in a little bit if we want, but I think due to the resistance happening over in America, that things are being rushed, they're speeding things up at a rate quicker than I believe they would like to. Because generally, if you study how they've sort of tiptoed this totalitarian control system around the world over the last 100 years, it's been very careful, very gradual, very careful to do it in a way that doesn't wake too many people up, keep everyone under their spell. And then all of a sudden it's like, bam. And so part of me thinks that that's a little bit more out of desperation than it is a good strategy for them. So they're taking a lot more risks. But yeah, they're my theories around Victoria. But at the moment, it's until more sort of evidence comes out, it's a little bit hard to say the exact reasons why.
Yeah. Now, on that note, going a bit deeper now, because there's one thing what we see on the world stage with isolated countries. We see all this happening in Australia, New Zealand. We think this is just, everybody's in their own things. But behind the scenes, everything is more connected. And it reminded me of something as well, what's happening in Australia, especially New Zealand, which I also was first surprised until doing deeper research. And I know you've gotten deep into Q as well, and especially his raw data and all the drops he put out or they put out. Can get into that as well more. But he talked also about, I think it was called Five Eyes. Have you heard about that? This kind of intelligence connection behind the scenes or network, which includes 5 countries that are connected like a web. And it is the US, Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So all of these kind of and those are the countries where all this, the lockdown is, or the socialist Marxist agenda is targeted. And I think it fits your theory as well, that they're using it as testing ground and as a foundation to implement their, socialist New World Order.
Yeah. And the other thing also I forgot to add about Victoria is we're more a leftist sort of state. So sort of similar to, say, California. We've been edging that way definitely over the last 10 to 15 years where that lefty mindset has really infiltrated our universities. It's infiltrated our culture to a degree. The governments have become much more left-leaning, so we've become more like, probably like California or New York, those sort of leftist states over in America. And also our modeling. One thing I've researched over the last week, our lockdown modeling is based on the Doherty Institute here in Melbourne, which is like a medical research institution. And I believe one of their major funders or influencers are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So once again,
surprise.
Yeah, and they've got I believe they've got connections with Gavi and the World Health Organization is very influential there. So once again, you can tie things back to Bill Gates, who's kind of like he's sort of become like this octopus at the center with his tentacles everywhere. The power and influence he's developed is just immense. But yeah, I've heard about that Five Eyes thing. I probably haven't researched it as deeply. I know America's involved, but I think obviously with what Donald Trump is doing, it's not having as strong an effect.
Yeah, I mean, that's still a lot of people try to, that's the trigger topic in itself. Trump is actually, in the way of what they are trying to achieve on many levels.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't mean this guy is perfect and whatnot, but, as the saying goes, or the popular saying in the scene, they didn't expect for her to lose. Talking about Hillary Clinton and the 16-year plan to destroy America, and then, because if America is destroyed, it's easier to put in the New World Order, basically, the socialist Marxist. And I also want to mention, because you say Australia being left-leaning like California, and we're not just talking about like traditional left, like liberal. We're talking about literally Marxist communist beliefs that have been infiltrated, infused the culture, the education system. So this is, far left has become like regular left. Right, and it's being normalized. Pathology is literally being normalized. That's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not that traditional left. I think the left has definitely been hijacked by this Marxist sort of communist socialist agenda, and as you see it over there, it's they basically want to destroy everything that sort of all the values, all the morals that have sort of that have sort of made countries what they are, and everything from destroying the sort of like family unit, destroying sort of people's connections with each other, and also obviously using minority groups, like sort of hiding behind the guise of standing up for minority groups to impose these draconian measures on everyone else. So it's sort of like they claim to be anti-fascist, but they impose these sort of fascist draconian kind of rules on everyone else, because if you say that, if you act like that, if we do this, then you're going to offend this group over here. But it's just a way of sort of controlling everyone else. Yeah,
the shaming. I mean, Antifa is the very far from being anti-fascist with their agenda and whatnot, and ties into Soros and all of these, even BLM, all these things, they have been hijacked as well. It's controlled opposition and whatnot, and sponsored by the people. And a lot of these people who support these seemingly virtue positive, whatever, minority supporting organizations, they have been hoodwinked as well, like useful idiots being used in the sense. I mean, that's, as we know, that's how the matrix works. But he also made a very important point, like they are not really smart the way they go about. It's almost becoming too obvious. And like you mentioned correctly, that also confirms my insight and research. They're becoming very desperate and they're panicking. And the reason for that is because they already have lost control. And they're trying to regain control because, if they wouldn't have lost the control, they wouldn't have the need to do all of that, what they're doing now. So they're panicking, and like a true psychopath, the Achilles heel of a psychopath, or like a 40 SDS forces, which we can talk about as well from a hyperdimensional perspective, the Achilles heel is wishful thinking, right? So they cannot like admit defeat or whatever. It's like a wild Arabian dog, you know what I mean, who will just fight until they're dead, even if or they already lost the game. So that's these futile attempts. You see it even in the US with Biden and Harris, and like, it's just insane. Like, it just doesn't even make sense anymore to support that, right? Yep. So they are definitely panicking. There's something happening behind. There's a lot of happening we don't know behind the scenes in all of that, right? But before we go a bit deeper, like I want you to maybe share for especially our Australian audience, like you mentioned before, what can Australians do right now? What would you suggest on the practical level to spread information, to get more out there and help each other basically?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And just on the point you just made then, I think one of the positives about what's happening right now in out of their desperation, how they're trying to tighten their grips of control over everyone, what it's done is it's brought the main players of this agenda out into the open. So typically they've thrived off operating the shadows, whilst society, the people in society are mechanically going around under the spell they've been put under by their culture. Meanwhile, these deep state players are engineering events from the shadows and getting away with it because only a few can see it, and it's so difficult to wake everyone up when everyone's just sort of stuck in their mechanical kind of like flow. What this has done has brought those ones who are controlled, bribed, or blackmailed, or willing participants out into the spotlight. So in here, we've got Dan Andrews. Everyone can see his true nature now. Bill Gates, who used to hide behind his philanthropic, or however you say that word, that kind of facade as a philanthropist, people are starting to see what his true nature is, and there's so many examples. I know over in America, more and more those deep state puppets, people are being able to see who they are, and at the same time, normally even if they were out in the open, normally people are so distracted by their lives, just by going about their everyday lives and trying to make a living and all the sort of things that people do on a day-to-day basis. They don't have the time or energy to research these things. And then you chuck on top of that the fluoride in the water and eating crappy diets and which obviously lower their vitality anyway. So it's hard to get people to sit and look at these things. Whereas at the moment, not only have these players come out of the shadows and the spotlight's on them for everyone to see, but people have all this time now to actually look into this stuff. People are at home. They don't have work distracting them. They don't have all these things distracting them. And so there's less and less excuses for people to actually look into this stuff. Obviously, there's still going to be people who spend all their time on Netflix, or, the alcohol stores are still open. So people can still drink them, use their normal buffers to kind of like numb themselves and not feel or explore these things. But more and more people are doing that. And that's where, to go back to your question, that's where more than ever before, it's so important to connect with each other and to support each other through this, because what people are going through is this awakening process, which for a lot of people is really scary. You come out of that shock phase and you start coming into lucidity about what's going on, and then that can be replaced by, holy shit, this is real. That's fucking scary. And so I've noticed more and more people right now are looking to connect, and that's why they're trying to stop that connection. That's why they're trying to make us socially distanced, not allowed to go to each other's houses, trying to censor on the internet, trying to separate us, trying to anyone who speaks out, they're trying to shame them in the media and turn everyone against each other. So we really need to combat that. We really need to reach out to our family and friends and just, if things need to be healed put things in the past and really work on connecting and supporting each other through this process. Because if we can work our way through this and get enough people on the same page, it really could be the foundation for a beautiful awakening and a beautiful sort of new level of consciousness to be birthed from this. And I'm really seeing, because I'm so involved in things going on here and heavily involved in social media and things like that, I'm seeing that real craving for connection with people. And whether it be creating groups or like you've done, getting together on the forums. Your forum has been absolutely amazing for that. People from all around the world connecting and sharing their fears, sharing their vulnerabilities, sharing their research and insights, and you get those new points of reference that can really, really help you. So for me, that's what I'm trying to do now, as someone who woke up a bit earlier than others, who has put a fair bit of time into doing that self-work and preparing for this. What's going on now isn't such a shock for me. So I'm trying to be that anchor, that grounded kind of like influence for people around, to sort of offer that support, offer that hope. I encourage people to do that with others, as well as, sharing research. You come across incredible resources. Let's share it around. Mm-hmm. We've got to overcome that fear of judgment, that fear of being censored, and that fear of being called a conspiracy theorist or whatnot. Because there's a lot of people out there craving this stuff, and we just need to push them in the right direction. And there's a lot of incredible resources going around. I heard yesterday that I was listening to an interview with that producer of Plandemic,
Mickey Willis.
Yeah, no. I'm sure you're thinking of getting him on your show. Maybe he would be a great guest. Yeah. He estimates that Plandemic 1 has had over 1 billion views. So which is incredible, and probably Plandemic 2 is probably in the hundreds of millions or whatever as well. And so the information is out there. And the other thing is also going back to what the foundation of your work has been, which has been self-work and shadow work. This is an incredible time to do some inner clearing and inner work on ourselves, because we don't have those distractions. We don't have to get up and go grind ourselves in the 9 to 5 every day at the moment. Yeah. Let's make the most of this opportunity. Let's not numb ourselves. Let's not distract ourselves. Let's find ways to sit with what we're feeling, get into the body, understand how to ground and transmute those energies. And that can be a really valuable thing for shadow work, so that we can anchor those higher energies. And just obviously what we can do for other people with that is just to support them in that process. The more people feel safe and supported, the more they're going to sit with and confront how they're feeling. Because jumping onto that sort of esoteric kind of way of looking at this, as you talk about in your work, what's happening here is higher energies are trying to anchor themselves in humanity now. And so we need more and more people doing the work to embody those energies, anchor them here, and bring light into this system that's been controlled by darkness for far too long. And these dark forces understand this is happening, which is why they're pulling out every stop in their book to try and stop this process that's going on. Yeah. And it's not only just happening with what I believe the patriotic resistance sort of centered in America, which is obviously sending them into this sort of state of desperation, but it's this bigger process going on as well. I think there is a natural kind of evolution happening here in humanity and on planet Earth that these darker forces are trying to stop. But ironically, in their efforts to try and stop it, I believe they're actually catalyzing it and actually helping it move faster. Exactly. So anyway, that was a bit of a long answer, but
no. Thank you. That was very well said. Thank you, Matthew. But you hit on some points I want to comment as well. Number one, about shadow work, like everything needs to come out of the shadows, because when we also know the inner work, it is about confronting the dark within and like not avoiding, like we all have gone through our addictions, like you have your sleeping pills, avoiding what you actually were holding in, all the quote unquote stuff we don't like in ourselves, we push away until we make the darkness conscious, as Carl Jung would say. So the inner work can bring up all these uncomfortable feelings that need to process and fail to release, so we can anchor the higher energies. But with all the stuff that's coming out in the world, so it's also collectively in the external world, the dark needs to come out, the shadows, it needs to be exposed. And people, you made a really good point, and that's also actually kind of like Q's agenda, so to speak, that people need to see for themselves, as he always said, that it needs to come out so they can expose the dark forces, the bad actors, the players, and all of that. So people can see for themselves, because it's not about, there's so many misconceptions about Q and Trump. We can talk about in the second hour, this whole savior stuff that they're going to save the world. No, it's up to us. And that's why when everything exposed, we see it now, we need to come together and stand up. And that's the whole point of making the darkness conscious. And we need to get together, as you said, support each other, share information. And there's the silent majority, it's becoming louder and louder, So I feel more and more that, it goes also way beyond politics, way beyond bipartisan, right? It's just about humanity to wake up, right, to these higher values and engage in the work, because, as you said, there's a birthing process happening from the higher picture perspective. And it's also interesting what you said, that, people like you or myself included, we might be not that shocked, because, like, even from my perspective, what I see now happening, I'm like, okay, guys, I've been talking about this for 20 years now. It's fine. Now it's happening. Like, I'm like, part of me is like, yes, that's awesome. I'm kind of excited, despite the craziness. I mean, there's like some, I can relate it to when I was a little child, when there's a thunderstorm coming, I get excited, but it's kind of dark, but exciting at the same time. It's kind of that feeling, that warrior attitude that we need to ride the wave. And then we all have our mission, like get activated. We need to be in service and help others and help each other with information and understanding it from the different levels, not to get caught up in the 3D as well, right? But understanding the bigger picture, which I definitely want to get more into the second hour. But before we finish up the first hour, because it's all about helping people to become aware of what's happening on all levels, and that ties, I think, beautifully into the book you wrote, Free Range Humans. I love the title, by the way, Exposing the Matrix Control System and Awakening the True Self. Because, like in your title, you alluded to, similar to my work, it is about both understanding the world within, but not blaming, externalizing, but doing the inner work. So can you tell our listeners and viewers what your book is about and where they can get it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book basically was just me journaling down. It started off with just me sort of journaling about my journey, because, I mean, the awakening process I was going through mixed with going to your retreat, which your retreat was a real turning point for me, a real catalyst of sort of discovering that esoteric path and just learning about shadow work and learning about embodiment, which were just incredibly transformative for me. And so when you sort of all these new insights are coming to you, for me, writing it down really helps to kind of organize things and help process what I'm going through. And at some point, I was writing articles and blogs for my website, and then at some point, I just thought, I just got this inner feeling this could actually, I think I'm seeing a book starting to take shape here. And so I thought I'd just start exploring that and seeing if I could put it together and seeing if synchronicities or the universe would sort of support me and give me the nudges that I was on the right path. And it kept giving me the nudges. So I just kept going with it. And eventually, released the book earlier this year. And I was really, really sort of pleased with how it turned out, and especially the timing of it. Just when people sort of, when this all started happening, I was able to offer a resource to help sort of like support people and inform people about what I believe is going on. But in a nutshell, the title Free Range Humans kind of like really sort of embodies what the book is about. As I started waking up, we could probably maybe explore this more in the second half. I really started to realize that humanity, or Earth, in so many ways has been turned into a farm, where we're not only being quite literally farmed by these, what's coming out more and more, with the child trafficking, and there's also like, the adrenochrome and pedophilia networks. And there's also organ harvesting and things like crazy disturbing things go on where humans are literally treated within these actually highly organized systems within these elite circles as like very similar to how we actually treat cattle, sort of like commodities, resources. There's things to be used and exploited for however they want. And then when you go more into the hyperdimensional aspect, I realize we're also actually being farmed for our spiritual energies, our life force energy. And the Earth, this what I perceive as this beautiful planet, this garden paradise, has been kind of like converted into this, for many thousands of years, into a sort of living hell for humanity. And these people and these beings that do control us, I sort of see them as perceiving themselves as our owners, and possibly they were our creators in some way. There's a lot of evidence that we were genetically created or genetically modified a long time ago, and so I think they see us as their property. And so when I sort of look at how a farmer treats his cattle or treats his chickens or something like that, he might have like love or respect for them or whatever, but really they're his products. And he's farming them for a purpose, to use them, to sell them, to use them as a food, to use them as a product. And so if he wants to market them as free-range animals, he'll give them certain conditions that make them healthier and happier. And it gives these animals, gives the cows roaming in their paddocks this illusion of freedom. But because they've been born into this paddock, they don't realize that they're actually in a captivity. What they see as their world, what they see as their freedom to roam around in the sun and socialize and eat grass, whatever, is actually a captivity that's controlled by someone, and then there is an agenda for them. One day they're going to the abattoir.
Exactly. Kind of reminds me, that's basically also what you just shared is Goodyear's Tale of the Evil Magician, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good one. Recommend people reading that. And so there's so many similarities between how we kind of use and exploit free-range animals to how we are. We're grown, we're born into these countries, and we're given this sense of this illusion of freedom. But within these, kind of like the animal's captivity, within these very controlled parameters, very, very tightly controlled regulations, laws, rules. And we're so used to that we just think, oh, that's just the way life is, because we're born into it. Our family are born into it. It's just normalized. And so we don't question it. We don't realize that we're actually treated like free-range animals. We're allowed to roam around free, but within certain parameters and certain regulations. And I view that what happens with humans from birth is I perceive it as a domestication process, that our natural embodied energies, our wild kind of like energies that make us who we are tamed, and they're kind of neutered. And that starts within just in the culture we're raised in our family. And it also obviously the education system, the media, all these institutions play a key role. They're designed and set up to domesticate us and program us into our native farm, so that we can sort of be used and exploited by these sort of these kind of like societies that operate from the shadows. So my book is about basically breaking that down to a very, very minute level and taking the reader on a journey where helping them understand how our native farms actually program us from birth, because through that awareness, we can then understand what's been done to us, understand our programming, understand our conditioning, increase that self-awareness, and then start to put in the work to actually peel that back layer by layer and start discovering who we truly are within. And that, as you know, that sort of shadow work that allows us to clear that stuff from within and allow our higher energies to anchor in and our true self to start to blossom from that. And so the book is really about exploring all the ways where we're programmed and turned into free-range humans, and then exploring all the ways we can reverse that, and then also tying it into the occult hidden forces, the alien agenda, and also tying it into the bigger sort of evolution of consciousness here. So it was a pretty big project that I embarked on, but I was somehow condensed it down into 90,000 words. 90 words. And so, yeah, nice. I was quite proud of it, and been getting pretty good feedback. And I've also realized from it that there's a lot less people read these days. That's what I've learned from publishing a book. People are so accustomed to audiobooks and podcasts and all that sort of thing. So I'm also I'm about a month away from releasing the audiobook version as well. So,
but still, like that's something to be said. Thank you, Matthew. There's something about short attention span epidemic, which I also feel is a matrix program with the information overflow. Everybody just Twitter, like, I don't know how many character they can read. Even on Facebook, I write more than 2 paragraphs and people are like, this is too long to read. They call it an article. I call it a fucking update. So there's something to be said. I mean, there's an esoteric law. Like you have to put effort into it. The truth. People want the truth on the platter, on a silver spoon, right? Without any effort. No, you get only out of life. Anything, you get as much out of it as you put into it, right? So that's beautiful, amazing. I already just think of like everybody in Australia should read this book right now for sure to get them a kickstart. And before we end up, where can people reach you, your website, and where can people get the book?
So my website is seedsofawareness.com.au. So all the purchasing options are on there, along with all my articles and all my videos and all those sort of things. For people in America and around the world, you can generally find it on Amazon. People in Australia, for some reason, Amazon don't ship here. They don't do print on demand here. So there's a company called Lulu that I use. It's a print on demand service. But people can find that through the website. Seedsofawareness.com.au.
Beautiful. I'll post it in the link as well, in the write-up info. Thank you so much, Matthew. So in the second hour, I definitely want to go deeper into some of the topics you just mentioned. We want to look more and take a deep dive. We talked about, the 3D matrix, a little bit of current events, but let's see how it looks from an occult, esoteric perspective. And also let's dive a bit deeper into QAnon and Trump and see that also from a bigger picture perspective, not just a Q perspective, you know what I mean? Because people seem to have very black and white views about this whole thing. And I know your view is also more nuanced. So let's dive into that. Again, the second hour is for members of my website. If you're not a member already, you can sign up at veilofreality.com. They will give you access to all the second hours of all podcasts and also access to the membership forum, which you've been a part of since the very beginning. And beautiful. Thank you so much, Matthew. And we'll be right back.